Oh, come on, man. Come on, man.
Oh, come on, man.
So this is the third week in our Come On Man series. We've been looking at these different instances out of the Old Testament of people who had these decisions, these choices, these opportunities, and they made decisions, and the only response you have is, come on, man, what were you thinking? You know, what's going on? Anyway, so we're excited to finish that. What do you think of my new t-shirt I got this week? Yeah. Someone brought this by and gave it to me on Friday and said, I am preaching in that this weekend. Now, I do want to say this little disclaimer. If you give me a t-shirt, it doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to preach in it. Some of you are thinking, this would be good business opportunity. We can advertise on Pastor Bob. This is not a billboard for rent. It's not. Pastor Greg, yes, but not me. Okay, so anyway, I'm excited about it, this series and finishing up today. Glad that you're here in Bellingham. Those of you joining us in Skagit, so glad that you joined us today. And in Boca Raton, thank you for tuning in. By the way, congratulations on your Dolphins beating the Saints. Anyway, so we've been looking at this. Now, last weekend, I talked about the fact that my youngest daughter had asked me, what is the absolute dumbest thing I ever did? And then some of you pointed out that I never finished the story, that I never told you what the dumbest thing I ever did was, and that was by design. And I'm not going to tell you today either. What I will do is I will tell you about what is probably my earliest recollection of my earliest significant come on man experience. Maybe not the earliest, there was a couple before this, but they're a little bit gross. But this is the one that I remember the most, is when I was a little kid. I was born in Ruston, Louisiana, deep in the South. I was the third of three children. My dad was a pastor down there. And as the children, as we grew older, there came a time where my sister and my brother would go off to school, and Dad would go off to work. In fact, got a picture of my siblings, and this is us down in Louisiana. Look at that guy. That's what I'm talking about right there. All right, so Lori, my older sister, and Jerry, my brother. So there were times, a little bit beyond these years, where they would go off to school, A.E. Phillips Elementary School. My dad would go off to work, and Mom said that when they all left, I would say this little deal every morning. I'd say, because I had this little list, I'd just say, just you and me, Mama, just you and me. And we had our special time, Captain Kangaroo and what. And so there we were on Greenwood Avenue in Ruston, and my parents had this couch that they had reupholstered. It had been pink, but when we moved into the new house, they had it reupholstered with white Naga hide of the Naga, some quality stuff. So one morning, it's just you and me, Mom, and I'm sitting there watching my Captain Kangaroo, and she was in the kitchen or something. And as I was sitting there on this big white Naugahyde couch, I had a pen in my hand. And as I had this pen in my hand on the armrest of this couch, I just started applying pressure on this pin on the Naugahyde, and all of a sudden, I felt this kind of just poke through. And I knew that probably wasn't best, but that was kind of cool. And so I did it again. And it just felt neat when you put that pressure in it. So a few times, Then I start connecting dots. Well, to quote Dierks Bentley, I knew what I was feeling, but what was I thinking? Because when Mom came out of the kitchen, there was no way to hide that. It wasn't like one dot. There were multiple dots with connected dots and holes in this couch, and she wasn't real happy, neither was Dad. And there was appropriate discipline that took place, and to which, if I had the wherewithal as that little boy, I probably would have said to myself, come on, man, that was dumb. Well, the next day, Jerry and Lori go off to school, Dad goes off to work. And in my normal routine, when I normally come and say, Mom, it's just you and me, she said, I came into the kitchen And I said, Mama, you know that little boy that poked the holes in the couch? He don't live here anymore. She said, well, I hope not. And she gave me a big hug. She loved me, you know. And here's the deal. Their love for me was never diminished by what I had done. Never once. And there was discipline that needed to take place, but they didn't diminish their love for me. And in fact, they forgave me and we moved on. Here's the point that we have seen in this whole series, because from the beginning I said, we're not talking about will God forgive you or will he not? Of course he will, and it doesn't diminish his love. With God especially, and with my parents in this deal. The forgiveness is instant, but the consequences are ongoing. Yeah, they loved me. Yeah, they forgave me. Yeah, they allowed me to be a part of the family, but the holes were still in the armrest of the couch. That didn't go away. They stayed there, and I think we put a towel or something over it until eventually we moved to Vancouver and got rid of that couch, but they were there. It was those reminders. And we have those things in our life, those come on man moments, those experiences, those choices, those things, those lapse in judgment, some mistake, a weak moment, an intentional decision, a sin, and all those things. And God forgives, yes, but that's not even really what we're talking about here. Because sometimes we're left with these consequences. And one of the ongoing consequences, as some of you are aware, is that maybe even though God forgives, maybe other people don't. Maybe your kids don't forgive you. Maybe your friends don't forgive you. Maybe your boss doesn't forgive you. Maybe your spouse doesn't forgive you. Maybe that's one of the consequences as well. So we've been looking at these guys out of the Bible. Esau, who sacrificed his future to satisfy an appetite. That he made this decision in the moment with a stopwatch, but the consequences he saw with a calendar. And then last week we saw Achan. Achan stole and a mess he was a. All right, so you remembered that poem. Well, good. So we see that Achan, he makes this choice, and he thinks it's an isolated incident. He makes it with a magnifying glass, but the ramifications of that are seen with binoculars, and it's not just his regret alone. It's the regret of other people, his family, and multiple other families in the whole nation. And I said, if we took every come on man experience from the Old Testament, we would be in this series for a lot of years. I mean, you think about it. Abraham, he had some real doozies. Noah had a deal. Jonah, Samson, David. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. These guys who have made these decisions. And many of them, and we could throw in Eve just to get the equal opportunity in here. Yeah, she messed it up for all of us. All right, so you have these guys, and they were leaders of God's people, leaders of Israel. As we get to this final one that we're going to look at today, I want us to pause for a minute to set the stage on this, talking about leadership. Because there's different ways that we have leadership. Sometimes there's leadership by virtue of a role, a title, a position, that you're given this opportunity, and just because you're in this, situation, you have leadership role. You're a parent, you're a leader. You get the title of captain of this team or whatever, you're a leader. You're the boss, you're the owner, you're the leader. These kind of things. What's really interesting is that there are some people who don't have a title, don't have a position, don't have a role, don't have that bestowed authority, and yet they have greater influence in our lives. They have a greater impact on our lives. They have a greater capacity to shape us, to mold us, to steer us. You see, when someone is given a title and there's authority that goes with it, sometimes there's this leadership that we kind of follow or we obey because they have the capacity to leverage that for or against us. They can make our life better, they can make it worse because they've got this authority. They can give us a ticket. They can give us a promotion. They can give us opportunities. They can fire us. They can penalize us. And so they've got some leadership over us. But then there are these other people who don't have the capacity to leverage anything. They don't have the capacity to give us a raise. They don't have the authority to fire us. They can't change, and yet they have a powerful, powerful leadership in our lives. Here's the case point. You think of someone like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr. They didn't necessarily have the title. They didn't have the role. They didn't have the position, but they had incredible leadership and influence. Now, with that, I believe, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive, but I think when it comes to that, we obey position, but we follow influence. We obey position because they've got, they can put fear in us. They've got something they can hold over us. And so we follow that. We obey them. But it's influence that really shapes our life. They're not mutually exclusive. But isn't it true that you can have one without the other? That there are people who have titles, they have roles, they have positions, and they have that authority, but they really don't have the influence. And at the same time, there are people who don't have the title, don't have the role, and yet they seem to steer the ship. You see a coach, he or she has the title, but it's that player that all the other players follow. They have the influence. You see that boss, that business owner, has the title, has all the authority, all the leverage, but it's that manager, it's that one worker, it's that one salesperson. They're the ones that have the influence. You have that pastor, and he's got the title, he's got the role, but it's that key leader, it's that one volunteer, it's that one staff member, and she or he is the one that really influences people. And whereas the leadership of the title is there, and maybe it's obeyed, it's the influence that's followed. I think if you had to choose between the two, influence is far better. Far better. Jesus understood this. He understood the difference in this. In fact, in Matthew 23, we see this. It says, Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. They've got the position. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. They've got the role. They've got this authority. So obey them. But, he says, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. You see what Jesus is saying? You obey them because of the role that they have, because of the position that they have, because of the title that they have, but don't follow them. Obey what they tell you to do, but don't follow them. They're not going to influence your life in the right direction. See, this whole thing that I'm talking about could be summarized with a different kind of authority, a moral authority. A moral authority. Now, you see this in families too. I spoke with a woman maybe 2 months ago, a young woman in our church, and she told about her family that had some levels of dysfunction. Multiple siblings. Her dad, a pastor, was very authoritarian in their home, very strict, conservative Christian home. And the way that this dad lived his life as a pastor and as a father, the hypocrisy that his children saw in his life, the control that he used, the way that he manipulated, the way that he leveraged his position as their dad and pastor, caused so much dysfunction in her and her siblings. She sat there with tears just streaming down her face, telling me about how messed up their whole family is. All the siblings in and out of counseling. Some of them walked away from church. One of her sisters, who claims now to be an atheist, points directly to her pastor father for her stance as an atheist. And messed up in their relationships. He has the title. He has the position. He's their dad. That doesn't change. He's a pastor. That doesn't change. But what he has forfeited is the moral authority. They don't respect him, and they don't follow him at all. Now, with that, and we'll get to the story here real quickly, but with that, I believe that in our lives, we need to take time and energy in establishing and maintaining moral authority. Now, I'm not talking about trying to put on a front and acting like you're something that you're not or someone that you're not. That's not what we're talking about. That's hypocrisy. What moral authority is the respect and the credibility and the influence that comes because of your character, because of your convictions, and because of the consistency between the two of who you are and who you're becoming. Not perfect, but who you are and who God is making you to be. The convictions, not the things that you believe, but the things that you live, and the consistency over time. When you have that, you begin to establish and maintain moral authority. And when you have moral authority, you have credibility and respect, and you influence in a way that a title and a role and a position never will allow. Without moral authority, any influence that you have, with friends, family, co-workers. Any influence you have without moral authority is very short-lived. It won't last. So today we're going to look at one of these instances from the Old Testament where both of these come into play, the title and the authority, the moral authority. And we're going to look, last week we looked at an individual that some of you had never heard of. We're going to look at a man today that most of you have heard of probably multiple times. We're going to look at the life of Moses today, and if you have your Bible or your phone or your tablet, your iPad, you can turn to Exodus chapter 2. We're going to land in there and look at an instance out of Moses' life events. As you're turning there, I'll give you a little bit of background just to catch you up in case you didn't watch the movie or didn't read the book. All right, so Moses was born into a poor Hebrew slave family in Egypt. At the time the Hebrews, the Israelites, are in Egypt, they're growing in number. They're becoming a powerful force to be reckoned with as well. And Pharaoh gets a little intimidated by this, realizing that if they were to all unite and do this uprising, it could be lights out for them. So he gives specific instructions to the midwives who deliver these children. And he says to these midwives, when a Hebrew baby is born, if it's a boy, just kill it. I mean, I know it's a little rough, but that was, he said, if it's a girl, let her live. Because they're trying to make sure that the next generation, the men of the next generation are gone. So he says to these midwives, just kill all the Hebrew baby boys when they're born. Don't let the moms know. Just say, oh, it was stillborn or whatever. Well, these two midwives, they fear God. So they choose not to do this. They let all the babies live. When Pharaoh calls them in, he calls them to account of this, and then here's their response. These Israelite women are amazing. Vigorous is the word that they use. They start having babies, and bam, they're there. Before we ever get there, they have these babies. And so Pharaoh sends out this thing to all of the Egyptians, saying, hey, you see any Hebrew baby boys, just grab them and throw them in the Nile. Okay, let the crocodiles have them. So now everybody's grabbing baby boys and throwing them in there. Well, Moses' mom has a little baby boy, and the scripture says she saw that it was a fine child. Here's a little question. What mom ever looked at her kid and said, that one's not fine, throw it out, let's try again? Of course she thinks it's a fine child. It's her child. So she has this little baby boy, and she tries to keep him hidden for 3 months. But it's like, this isn't going to work so well, because anyone sees that he's got different plumbing than the rest of them, they're going to throw him in the Nile. So she makes a basket. Some of you have heard this story before. Gets this basket and puts him in the Nile, floating. Now, again, it wasn't launching him down some rapid crocodile infestation. This was a very strategic place. Put him amongst the reeds, probably knowing full well who would be showing up there. Pharaoh's daughter comes to this place to bathe, and she hears this crying in the reeds. So she has one of her servant girls go over, and she sees this little baby boy. And it's like, can we keep him? It's like a kitty, Can we take him home? Meanwhile, Moses' sister's over here and said, hey, if you want to keep him, I know a Hebrew woman that can actually be kind of like a wet nurse for you and take care of him and wean him. And so she says, yeah, that'd be great, and I'll even pay her. So she takes her brother to his mom, and she weans him. She nurses him. How long that is, I don't know. For some of you that are really big into this, maybe by the time he's 12 or 15, I don't know. Whenever you finally cut off the line on that one, I don't know. But she nurses him and weans him and then gives him back to Pharaoh's daughter. Now, before we get to Exodus 2, we'll look real quickly at Acts chapter 7. It says, when Moses, was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Remember, these are the guys who built the pyramids. He gets all the wisdom, all the mathematical wisdom, all the geometrical wisdom, all the engineering wisdom, all the architectural wisdom, all the construction wisdom, all the masonry wisdom, all the astronomy wisdom. He gets the best education on the face of the planet, all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And he was powerful in speech and action, which I find this very interesting because fast forward, God calls him. What's his excuse of why he can't go? I can't talk. Yeah, nice try, Mo. We see right here. He can too. Apparently, he's a very powerful, influential speaker in his life that he is this bigger than life force to be reckoned with. Here's this man, Moses. So now, Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. We're going to fast forward a little bit. He's had all the privileges of wealth, of education, of opportunity. He grows up in Pharaoh's household. But Scripture implies he knows his roots. He knows he's not really one of them. When he sits around Pharaoh's table, he looks around and says, one of these things is not like the others, and he realizes it's him. It also implies he even knows who his family is, maybe because of the way that he was raised as a little kid. So verse 11, we see this. One day, now this is 40 years later, he's 40 years old. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out, because he's isolated from them, he's in the palace. He went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. You can imagine there's this wrestling match that's going on in his mind, this tension that he's dealing with, this struggle as he sees his own people, his heritage, and the oppression that they're under. And this part of him, as he looks around and maybe he notices there's not a lot of men his age, because when he was born, what they did with guys his age was throw them in the Nile. And maybe there's some survivor guilt. Why am I even alive? No one else boys born around my age are alive. And if I were to be alive, best case scenario, I should be in here laboring with these people. And maybe there's just this guilt that he's wrestling with as he sees them working in the hard labor under the harsh sun. And he sees in their eyes the discouragement. He sees the injustice that they face every single day. He sees the oppression of his people, the discouragement, the despair, and it just breaks his heart. And as he's watching this and probably feeling guilty for being in the palace and having all the nice food and everything he could want, he sees something that just puts him over the tipping point. He just can't handle this when he sees this. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Now, we don't know all the details of this. Maybe it was an old man. And maybe he's looking at this thinking, here's this old man, skin like leather from working in the sun, slaving away for Pharaoh all these years, back hunched over because of the heavy burdens he's had to bear. And now he's doing his very best, and you're beating on him? Come on, he's a slave. He's doing his best. He's an old man. Or maybe it's a young boy. This little guy doesn't even have facial hair yet. He should be playing. He should be learning, but he's out here slaving away. And pick on someone your own age. Pick on someone your own size. And he sees this, and he just can't handle this. He says, someone's got to do something, and I'm that person. This cannot go on. This is not right. I've got to do something. And he does. He does. Glancing this way and that, this is what that is. Okay. In case you weren't sure. Glancing this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, wait a second. I was raised in Sunday school. I heard about Moses my whole life. This story never made it on the flannel board with Mrs. Schimmelfinney telling us about Mo. He's killing a guy. This is God's Moses guy. He's killing a guy. And then burying him. Isn't it interesting how similar this is to Achan? Looks around, no one's going to see. Go and hide it. Isn't this interesting how similar this is to us? Look around, no one's going to see. Try to cover it up. Now, some of you might be saying, yeah, but Bob, you got to give him a break. This is Moses, and this is before he got the 10 Commandments. Yes, you're right. So maybe he didn't know, thou shalt not kill. It hadn't been given to him yet. Okay, possibly. Let me just tell you this, for Moses and for you and me, if you have to do this before an action, you know it's wrong. And if you have to hide it and cover it up so no one will find out afterwards, you know it's wrong. Moses knew that what he was doing was wrong. He knew he shouldn't do this. He knew it would be a bad thing, but I think he does it, and maybe he goes into justification mode. Well, yeah, it was wrong, but what he was doing was wrong too. Sounds like kids, right? Yeah, well, I know it wasn't right, but my motives and my intentions were right. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have killed the guy, but the injustice that this entire nation is facing, the oppression, that's not right either. And comparatively, I mean, how many of the Hebrews have been killed? And so he probably goes into this justification mode, and he's probably even thinking, maybe God brought me here for just such a time as this. Maybe I can be their deliverer. Maybe I can be their helper. And maybe he gets in his mind this idea that, well, because I want to bring about justice to those who have been treated poorly, because I want to bring freedom to those who are oppressed, that somehow justifies it. And here is the truth for all of us. When the ends justifies the means becomes the beginning of the end. When you get this idea that, well, but the bigger vision allows me to cut some corners. The end product allows me to do away with integrity. What I'm hoping to accomplish allows me to cheat a little bit, allows me to lie a little bit, allows me to blur the lines a little bit, allows me to get into the gray area. When the ends justifies the means, you begin to be done at that point. Because you begin sacrificing really the very thing that you need most, and that's the moral authority. So maybe Moses convinces himself it's okay. Had a night of rationalizing his actions, feels justified, so the next day he goes back. The next day he went out and he saw two Hebrews fighting. And he asked the one in the wrong. Notice it's not just a little skirmish. One of them is clearly wrong in picking on the other. He's bullying him. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? Now maybe he comes. He comes with his title, Pharaoh's son, comes in his chariot maybe, comes with his role, with his authority. And maybe he thinks, now I come with a moral authority because I'm their advocate. I'm helping them. And he says to this one, why are you fighting? Why are you doing this? Is it not enough that you have to labor under the sun? Is it not enough that you're oppressed by the Egyptians? Is it not enough? And now you've got to, you guys are brothers. Brothers don't fight. Brothers got to hug. Come on. And he thinks this is going to be great because now he's the advocate for them. And you would think that the guy would say, oh, you're right, Moses. You've got such wisdom. I should follow you. Look at the response. The man said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? He lost his moral authority. And all he has is his power of his position. Guy says, I'm not following you. I'm not going to do what you're going to tell me to do. But if you want to power up and kill me, well, obviously you do that without any problem. We saw that yesterday. And he sacrificed the very thing that he needed most, and that was the moral authority to influence these people. And he realizes that. It scares him. Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. You can't get anything past that Moses. Guy tells him exactly what he did yesterday. He goes, someone found out. Well, yeah. Not only did this guy find out, but apparently all the Hebrews began to find out, and the guards began to find out, and the captain of the guards began to find out, and it made its way clear into Pharaoh to the very top, and Pharaoh even found out. Everyone found out. And the result, verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well, which is, I think, is kind of interesting, fun to talk about. We don't have time today. Moses heard of this, and he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled. Moses has already lost and sacrificed his moral authority with the Hebrews. Now he loses his title, his position, and his authority with Pharaoh. See, here's the truth about this whole thing of moral authority. Moral authority is so incredibly fragile. You could spend your entire life building and maintaining moral authority. Month after month, year after year, and then with one decision, it's gone. Just like that. It's so fragile. Gordon MacDonald said this: Moral authority, when shattered, is almost impossible to regain. Almost impossible to regain. And the reason I use that quote is because Gordon MacDonald knows what he's talking about. Some of you maybe who were raised in the evangelical church may remember Gordon MacDonald from the 80s. He wrote a book entitled Ordering Your Private World. It was huge. He wrote a follow-up book called Renewing Your Spiritual Passion. He was an author, a conference speaker, sought around the United States. He was a pastor of a significant church in the Northeast part of the United States. Incredible man, incredible influence, incredible moral authority. People looked to him. He had a great impact. And then one day, and I don't know all the details, and I don't need the details, but there was an inappropriate relationship with a woman who was not his wife. And in that instance, he lost it all. Now, fortunately, Gail, his wife, stuck by his side, and their marriage is very, very strong today. But over the years, he has slowly, methodically been rebuilding his moral authority. And he said this, when talking about losing moral authority, regaining what was lost takes sacrifice and a lot of time. Here's the good news. Gordon MacDonald has regained his moral authority. He's very influential again. But it didn't happen overnight. He says, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of sacrifice. And he would go on to say, it takes way more time than most of us believe. That this idea that, well, hey, God forgave me, let's get back on to it. Yes, God forgave you, but it takes some time. And Moses experienced this as well. He loses his position and his title, but he sacrifices his moral authority. And then over time, he begins to rebuild it. And it's not just a 6-month hiatus. Back to Acts chapter 7, it says, after 40 years, this didn't happen overnight. 40 years had passed. An angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. After 40 years of time, God says, okay, Moses, we're going to get you back in the game. Enough time has elapsed. You've got your authority back. But it wasn't just time. The writer of Hebrews says this, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Look at this. Here's the sacrifice. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. When Moses comes back, he doesn't come back as the prince of Egypt. He comes back as the humble servant of God from the desert, broken, but redeemed and humble. He never gets his title back, but he gets something more important. He gets moral authority. And he leads them out of 400 years of bondage. And he leads them across the desert. Listen, it's not the end of his come on man experiences. He still does some really stupid things. He ends up not being able to go into the promised land, but he had regained that moral authority. See, some of you are sitting there going, yeah, but I'm not leading anyone out of Egypt. I'm not even leading a company. Here's the truth for all of us. When it comes to moral authority, we all have that. We all have that opportunity with our families, with our friends, coworkers, people that we know. And it's not about talent. It's not about ability. It's not about your wealth. It's not about your title. It's not about charisma. It's all about your character, who you are, your convictions, not beliefs, your convictions, how you live, and the consistency of those two over years. That who we are, who God has created us to be, how he's transforming our lives, how he's redeeming us, and living on convictions over time builds that moral authority. And you and I, every single one of us, we have the opportunity every day to develop or to destroy moral authority. Every single day. Choices that we make. And developing it takes a long time. Week, month, year, decade. And sadly, destroying it can happen with one choice. So for us, take these words that Paul gave to some Christians as they're trying to develop the character and the conviction and the consistency, moral authority. He writes to them in this book of Galatians, he says, let us not become weary in doing good. When you're thinking, why do I continue to do this? Does it make a difference? Does anyone notice? Does God even notice? It doesn't seem like it's working. I could be, do not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, and it may be way down the road, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And part of that harvest that we reap is the moral authority of maybe some people, some family members, some individuals you work with who have been watching your life for years. Every day, the choices we have. Now, I want to wrap up our series because we've been looking at these individuals, and it's a whole lot easier to spot their flaws with Esau, with Achan, with Moses. But as we've said, when we look at their lives, we see a mirror reflection of our own lives, of our own decisions. And the hope of this series is that we can learn from their mistakes so that going forward, we won't make those mistakes. That we will have less come on man experiences in our life. That we will have less of those regrets. But the truth is this. Looking back, we've all made some choices and decisions. And some of them have ongoing consequences and maybe regrets. And some of them maybe have never, ever been dealt with, have never been unburied, have never been brought before the Lord. And some of them you just keep looking this way and that and trying to hide them. And you're afraid that if you brought them out, God would say, come on, man, what if our loving, gracious God were to say, come on, bring it to me. Come on, let me forgive. Come on. Let me redeem it. Come on, let's restart. Come on, let's rebuild. Come on. As we close this day and this series, I want you to watch and experience something on this stage that I hope is the reality of what's going on in the hearts and the lives of every single one of us. And maybe dealing with some come on man experiences that God so desperately longs to forgive and to redeem.